will begin by introducing myself. First of all, thanks for being here. It's such a pleasure to be part of this event and to be able to take advantage of this massive opportunity to talk with more people about a topic that I could talk about the whole day, that is failure. I am co-founder of a movement called FuckUp Nights, and I am executive director of the research arm of that movement that is called the Failure Institute. But before getting started, I'd love to ask you, who has heard about FuckUp Nights before? Please show me your hands. Good. Who has actually been in a FuckUp night? Okay, good, a couple of hands. Any of you have shared a failure story in a FuckUp night? Not yet. Well, get ready, because you will soon. Probably some of you may be wondering, what is FuckUp Nights? I will tell you more about it now. FuckUp Nights is a global movement that right now looks more or less like this. FuckUp Nights was born in September 2012, and now we have presence in over 230 cities in over 70 countries. And what happened in a FuckUp Nights is basically that three people publicly share a business failure story using 10 images and 7 minutes. This is something that was born as a hobby, and I think it's super powerful to be able to create a global movement based on vulnerability and failure. And I will spend the next minutes talking about two important questions. The first one is, next, how to create a global movement. This is probably one of the questions that I receive more frequently. And the second one is how to overcome failure. But to be totally honest and transparent and set the example, I will begin by sharing my own failure story, my own fuck-up story. It started when I was 16 years old and I started to pay social service in indigenous communities in Mexico. I am originally from Mexico City. I am based in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I studied in Mexico most of my life. And I started paying service when I was 16 years old, mainly in indigenous communities, very rural, and places where poverty was the rule, basically. And and I did this by many, many years. When I was in college studying businesses, I kept paying social service in these type of communities, and I met a group of indigenous artisans. They were amazing. They were doing embroidered handicrafts. And as you will see, I am someone that is always asking a lot of questions. And at that point, I asked, like, why are you doing this? Is this for decoration? It's a hobby? Is someone buying this? And to my surprise, they answered, yeah, there is a guy that comes once a month and buys everything we produce. And then I asked, and how much is this guy paying you? And he was paying $2. $2 for a month of work. I was totally angry when I heard that. I was studying business, I was 20 years old, and I was very naive. And for me, it was very simple to say, of course, why don't we create a social enterprise to support these women, you know, fair trade, there are many opportunities. And I did everything by the book, as they used to teach you 10 years ago in business school. 10 years ago in business school, we were not thought about MVPs or about the lean startup. That is really new. 10 years ago, we were taught to create a business plan and execute it, and that's exactly what I did. I spent many months creating my business plan. I found partners that were also my friends. We got legally constituted, we found investors, we started producing, we started selling, we started winning awards, which was pretty impressive, because for 2 years, the business basically survived out of the money we obtained through winning awards and winning contests. We were one of those social enterprises that were super sexy and were getting money from contests, not from a real business model. And basically, that killed us. And you know what is sad? That there are still many social businesses trying to create money as we were doing, which is totally wrong. And what happened in the end is that all of my business partners that were also the employees of the business started looking for real jobs where they have a real salary. And I ended up doing everything on my own. And I spent 6 months in denial. Basically, I was thinking that a miracle would happen and it would save the business, and of course it never happened. The conclusion is that the financial planning we had made was over-optimistic, was really bad done. And after 6 months of denial, I had to be honest, first of all, with myself. The business was already dead. Then with my partners, then with our friends and family, and finally with the indigenous women we were working with, and that was the worst part. I can tell you that probably one of the saddest days of my life was when I had to go back to the Sierra Negra, to this indigenous community in Mexico, and get honest with the women and said, like, this business is already dead, it's not your fault, it's basically my fault, I am so sorry. And I felt really awful because my only intention in there was to create a positive impact, and I felt like I had done exactly the opposite. But well, that's how life happens sometimes. And this was so sad for me that I decided to repress this episode of my life and not to talk about it for 7 years. Yes, 7 years. I became a professional in hiding this episode of my life from my CV, from my conversations, until one night I was drinking mezcales with 4 friends. Have you tried mezcal? Mezcal, for those of you that have never tried it, it's like tequila but stronger. And people say that mezcal does not get you drunk, it gets you magical. So we got some magic at that moment. We kept drinking mezcal, and we realized that we have all screwed up businesses, and we never shared those stories, despite the fact that we are really close friends. So we decided to talk about our business failures for 3 hours and drink more mezcal and drink more mezcal. And you can imagine how was the end of that conversation after 3 hours of talking about failure and drinking mezcal. Of course, we were drunk, we were magical, and we were also really inspired by this talk. In fact, I think that that was one of the best business conversations we have ever had. And we decided to replicate that experience with more friends. The truth is that the FuckUp Nights movement was planned in 15 minutes. Basically, we said, okay, let's make this happen, let's make it happen again. Why we don't make it happen in 2 weeks in order to make it real, to make it really, really happen. And after deciding that we're going to have only 3 or 4 speakers and they are going to share their failure story using 10 images and 7 minutes, I asked my friends, well, guys, if we are really going to make this happen, this should have a name, right? And one of them said, FuckUp Nights. The truth is that we never thought about the name of the brand more than a minute. The immediate reaction was, yeah, FuckUp Night, that's a great name. And we kept thinking about other stuff. We never considered the impact of having the F word in our name. For instance, we have never been able to buy Google ads, Twitter ads, Facebook ads, or any type of ads because we have that word in our name. All of our growth has been totally organic, and well, that's good. One good for one bad thing. But to be honest, at the beginning of the FuckUp Nights movement, our biggest challenge was to get these guys, the brave people willing to openly talk about a failure, a business failure they have experienced in their lives. And this was a little bit ironic because the truth is that there are more failure stories out there than success stories. 8 out of 10 business fail. This means that there are more cases of failure than cases of success. But of course, no one wants to talk about that moment where they were about to make it and they just made it and they don't make it. That happens a lot. I have another one for cat lovers. But well, we finally learned how to convince people to talk about their failures in public. And for that reason, when we got our speaker number 100, we were super excited. So we decided to publicly thank at the end of that FuckUp Night to the first 100 brave speakers that decided to publicly share a business failure. We were super excited. At the end of that session, a friend of mine asked me a question that changed my life. He asked me, Leti, you have heard over 100 failure stories. Could you tell me which are some of the most common causes? And I was shocked because I had no idea. The truth is that his question was really wise. My friend was trying to understand what may kill his own business. And we were not able to give him a clear answer. So I remember that night, after the FuckUp night, I went back home and started Googling data on business failure research in English and Spanish, and I spent many, many hours on that and concluded that there were almost no information about business failure and the main factors that lead to business failure. So we felt that we have in some way the moral responsibility of being able to answer that question. And we started looking for partners to make the research happen. We asked all of the research centers and universities and think tanks in Mexico. We got a really good response from most of them. Of course, there were some people that were afraid because of the word fuck, as you may imagine. But we finally partnered with EGADE Business School. It's the largest business school in Mexico for three main reasons. The first one is that they already have a business center, a research center based on entrepreneurial research. The second one is that they totally got the concept. They have no problems with the word fuck. And the third one is that when we showed them the research proposal, they said, this is really cool, guys. In fact, we tried last year to do a research on business failure, and we failed. And basically, they failed because they could not have access to the cases or the data that could make this type of research possible. But the truth is that I was still afraid that that research was going to be a failure. So we started visiting all the places in Mexico, the 32 states of the country, asking people, did you fail in a business? We need you. And we finally got all the cases we needed, all the data we needed, and the project was, in fact, a massive success. It got so much attention that we even got funding to create a book and to put the research inside the book. It's called the FuckUp book. You can get it for free from our website. It is in English and Spanish, and in the near future it will also be in German. And the book contains the FuckUp Manifesto. It is based in the FuckUp Manifesto. This is something we created another mezcales night. We were thinking about pieces of advice that we would have loved to receive at that point where we were really suffering, struggling with failure. So we turned the FuckUp Manifesto into a book. Another interesting fact is that the FuckUp Manifesto is our most viral post. Every time we publish the FuckUp Manifesto in LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or anywhere, it's crazy what happens. So we turned the manifesto into a book that, of course, also included the research on the main causes of failure for startups in Mexico. What was interesting is that the book started to be used by business incubators and universities. When I realized that guys in business schools were reading the FuckUp book, I was really surprised. And for those reasons, they invited us to replicate the study in Colombia the following year. And after these two experiments of failure research, we have been doing so many research on different stages of failure in different countries, in different industries. For instance, we made a research about the failure of tech startups in Mexico. A couple of months ago, we published another one based on social enterprises. Right now, we are working with the Inter-American Development Bank on a research on creative industries all over Latin America. And we are about to publish a policy paper. This is lovely. The policy paper is called Public Policy Recommendations Through the Lens of Business Failure. We are working on this with another development bank called CAF, Corporación Andina de Fomento. All of these reports, you're going to be able to take a look at them at our website. And now I want to share with you some of our latest projects. One of them, it's a tool that measures the impact of FuckUp nights in large corporations. Sometimes we organize FuckUp nights for big companies such as Coca-Cola, Google, IBM, Microsoft. And the idea is to convince entrepreneurs, insiders from the company to openly share their failure stories. I have to tell you that these are my favorite FuckUp nights. I just love to see the face of the CFO that cannot believe that this is really happening. And we have been thinking about how to measure the impact of these interventions. And it's good to see that, yeah, these things are working. We will give you more data on this by the end of the year. We're also working on the Global Failure Index that is our own data platform. This is lovely because what happens with the Global Failure Index is that we put together all the power of the FuckUp Nights community. To give you an idea, every month we have 200 new failure stories shared at FuckUp Nights. This is massive from all different countries, all continents. So what we do is that we take all this data and case studies into the magical machine of the Failure Institute, and we have gotten two outputs at this moment. The first one is the Global Failure Index itself, where we put together the power of data plus AI to identify trends and patterns. This is a platform that is based on geolocation, and we're also working in adding new layers of data, for instance, to see how the rise on the sea levels will affect businesses. And I have to tell you that there are bad news, guys. The risk of flooding is there. It's around the corner. This is another product that we are creating with the help of the FuckUp Nights community. We published our first report on the state of failure last month. The report is really long. I will share with you just some insights that I found especially interesting. The first is related with the stage of failure in the companies in America versus Europe. In Europe, most of the business failed in the growth and acceleration stage, while in America, most of them failed in the initial stage. Talking about the type of businesses that are failing more, we have 4 times more B2B failed businesses in America than in Europe. In Europe, we have 2 times more businesses failing in the educational side. And when we talk about software business, there is something weird happening. We are not still very sure why is this happening, but there are 8 times more software enterprises failing in Europe than in America. And this is probably my favorite question. We ask all the speakers, what did you do after your business failed? It's interesting to see that most of them decided to create a new business. The main difference between the entrepreneurs based in Europe versus America is that in America, most of them, after the failure, they go back to school. While in Europe, most of the failed entrepreneurs look for emotional recovery. If you want to learn more, visit our website, thefailureinstitute.com. You can get all the reports there for free. And all of them are in English and Spanish. So you might still be wondering how to create a global movement. Yeah, data, the power of data, AI, etc. Very interesting, but I am here to learn how to create a global movement. And I will tell you how we made it happen. As you know, FuckUp Nights was born as a hobby, as an experiment. And one of our basic premises when the movement was born was keep it simple, make it happen. And every decision we took 5 years ago when this was born, it was to look for the simplest way to make things happen. And for that reason, we were really reluctant to open social media accounts. We decided to open social media accounts when FuckUp Nights was 6 months old. At that point, it was only taking place in Mexico City. And we decided to open social media accounts because people were asking all the time, how can I get more info about the next FuckUp Nights? So yeah, we will create social media accounts. But which was impressive, and we had no clue that this was going to happen, is that people from all over the world started asking, how can I get FuckUp Nights to my city? How can I organize FuckUp Nights in my city or in my country? We created a very basic manual. And what happened is that 2 months after we opened the social media accounts, we were already organizing FuckUp Nights in 15 cities, mainly in Latin America and in Spain and in Germany. And at that point, you know, organizing FuckUp Nights in 15 cities, it was not a hobby anymore. It was an actual job, and someone had to work for it full time. Otherwise, it was going to be a fuck-up. So I decided to quit my job to work for FuckUp Nights full time. And I have to tell you, that was one of the best decisions I have ever made. And the first thing I did was working a little bit more on the manual. And then I made a list of 20 cities. 20 cities that I thought that could make the movement viral. And there were basically the big capitals of the world. You may think about it, London, New York, Paris, Tokyo, etc. And I spent 6 months looking for the best organizers in those cities. And guess what? It worked. It got viral. At this point, we are still growing 16% a month in the number of cities, and we are receiving every month probably 40 emails from people all over the world asking how to take FuckUp Nights to their city. It's crazy. And now we go into a process to see if they have, you know, the perfect fit, if they really know how to organize this type of event, if they are really willing to talk openly about failure. That's important. And that's how we managed to create a global movement. Since then has been a lot of logistics. And the second question is how we make money out of FuckUp Nights. That's interesting because most of the movements don't have a real business model. As you already know, in my first business attempt, I failed because I never got money to pay a salary to my partners. Now we are a team of 10 people working full-time for FuckUp Nights or the Failure Institute. And how we get the money to pay them? We have 3 main revenue streams. The first one is that all the FuckUp Nights organizers pay a monthly license. This is a sort of smart passive income that will keep growing as the number of cities grows. The second one is that, as you already know, we organize FuckUp Nights for large corporations. We call them special editions or corporate FuckUp Nights. And of course, we charge them for that as well. And the third one is that we partner with governments and development banks and investment funds to do research on business failure. They are really interested in understanding why small businesses are failing, because I think that this is a really good way. It's like, in some way, understanding why business fail is like creating the vaccine to prevent the failure. And that's how we have managed to live. The truth is that to get to these 3 revenue streams, we had many, many fuck-ups. I am sure that we tried more than 10 things that never worked. But I think it's part of the philosophy of organizing FuckUp Nights and creating a movement around failure. You have to try, and accept that a lot of things are just not going to work. And they are my lovely partners. The truth is that we still look at like that at this stage. We always have more questions than answers. And after this 5-year journey of organizing FuckUp Nights and creating the Failure Institute, probably 2 of the most important questions we still are trying to answer are how to recover from failure, and according to science, how to build resiliency. This is something that you will be hearing more and more and more. Let's begin with what the fuck is resilience. Who has heard this word before? I think it's really trending right now. Well, resilience is a term we stole from the physics world. And it refers to the ability to bounce back, to recover after failure. And to begin with, I will share with you 2 facts about failure and resiliency. The first one you already know. Failure is much more common than success. People will always talk about their successes in business school, in conferences like this and others, even in business magazines. Most of the contents are based in success. But the truth is that most of the businesses eventually fail. The second one is that your thinking style has a lot to do with the way you cope with failure. A thinking style is how you interpret the world and how you understand what happens around you, good and bad things. So, in other words, failure is a state of mind. And I think that this is really important. It doesn't matter, business failure is a fact, business failure is not cool. Some people say that we should celebrate failure, but the truth is that I think that we should not celebrate failure. Sometimes in FuckUp Nights, it looks like a celebration of failure, but I think that that's a natural consequence of the magical formula of tragedy plus time equals comedy. But the truth is that failing is never something that should be celebrated. It's something that we should learn from, but it's not that easy. The question is how to bounce back from failure. And this is the more simplistic way of looking at it. First, step 1, try. Step 2, fail. Step 3, learn. Step 4, try harder and smarter. But the thing is that the third step, it's much more difficult and complicated than just saying, yeah, I will learn from my failures. I can tell you that I have heard thousands of people sharing their failures, and most of them did not learn a thing about it. Why is that? Because learning from your failures is it's much harder than just saying, yeah, I failed, that's good, because I will learn something. In order to learn from your failures, you have to go through the 5 stages of grief and loss. I am sure you have heard of them: denial and isolation, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. What is interesting is that these stages can have a different order, and every person lives them in a very different way. What is important is to get to the acceptance stage, because once you get there, you can really learn from your failures. You can really see your failure with a larger perspective, with more objectivity, and finally realize that it was probably your fault. That happens in many cases. So remember, failure never equals learning. In order to really learn from your failures, you have to go to this process, to suffer a little, and finally to accept what happened and learn from it. And the next question is how to rewire your brain to be more resilient. According to science, there are 3 really powerful things that you can start doing right now. And if you leave this conference and you forget everything and you only remember this slide, I will be happy, because this is probably the most important thing I want to share with you. The first one is to be mindful, practice mindfulness. There is a direct relationship between being resilient and having a mindful brain. And mindfulness is not magic. It sometimes sounds magical, and some mindfulness practices include a little bit of visualization. I prefer to call it imagination. But basically mindfulness is training your brain to be more plastic, is to enhance your brain plasticity, and that will help you a lot at the moment of failure, and to be mindful about what is happening at that stage. There are many apps for this. I personally use an app called Headspace. It's really good to learn mindfulness, Headspace. The second one is share your failure. I have heard many FuckUp Nights speakers saying, thanks for inviting me to share my failure. This was like an exorcism for me. I don't have to hide this episode, this dark episode of my life anymore. So you can share your failure at FuckUp Nights or not. Just do it with your friends, with your family, with your stakeholders. That will relieve you a lot. And if you are willing to use this hashtag, share your failure, share the failure, that is one of our official hashtags, please do it. You will make me really, really happy. And the third one is create networks. I really want to stress this part. People that are more socially connected recover better from failure. They recover faster. And I am not talking about being socially connected to more friends, to more coworkers, to more family members. This is about the quality of those connections, to be able to really create networks of vulnerability where you can be yourself, where you can accept the good and the bad stuff that is going on in your life. And I really wanted to stress this because according to science, having vulnerability networks, having safe spaces where you can be yourself and say, hey guys, I just fucked up, is what is going to be more helpful at the moment of recovery, at the moment of really practicing resilience. I think a lot about sports. I am really into sports. That is why my knees are so destroyed. I thought about my dress 2 times today because I was practicing jiu-jitsu and bike mountain last week and they got a little bit destroyed. But I said, yeah, we're going to talk about vulnerability. I'm going to be vulnerable and show my knees as they are. It doesn't matter. And I think a lot about the similarities between the business world and the sports world. And probably one of the main similarities, and this is totally related with the creation of networks, is that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, if you want to create a movement, go together. And please, please remember that success is never final and failure is never fatal. Thank you.